Good morning, watchers. Welcome to Brother Sal's Sunday Gathering at the Storehouse, our weekly commentary on world events. We first started in 1996 and have become more relevant ever since. Today, posting 2 shows per week to our YouTube channels, BroSal and Philadelphia Church. For 20 years, we have integrated the historical landscape that unfolds daily with the prophetic analysis anticipated by eschatology. We bring you non-traditional insights and uncensored discussion of issues purposely ignored by media of all kinds. Join us now for the only discussion of its kind. And joining me again this week is my son, Tony. Welcome, Tony. What do you have for us?
Hello, Dad. Good morning. Thanks for having me on. I've been reading through the stories, and again this week it's back to having lots of news every week. In my inbox every day I get as I've said, the Yahoo stories for the day, the headlines picked just for me, and because of all the Middle East stuff that I'm always researching, most of my daily stories have to do with that topic. And I was talking about, how many weeks there, almost 3 weeks over Christmas, coincidentally, that all those stories just dropped off the map. And well, now they're back on the map. And, same stories are back that were there before. And it's interesting how they just weren't there for a few weeks. So, this week, the trend seems to be the stuff that's, mentioned the most. The migration crisis, the end of Europe, we're talking about. And also, I think, Dad, what I think is coming, I've been saying it for a while, that, we all need to read between the lines of the mainstream or even alternative media propaganda and have some sort of context to fit all the news into, some foundational understanding of which, we can try and decipher this stuff. And so, because we look at this from an eschatological viewpoint through the prophecies of Daniel and others that we've been anticipating and watching the historical evidence for 3 decades. And so now that's our context. Our foundation is 30 years of eschatological framework. And so we're watching the historical events fall into this framework. And so that's why I was able, to see as many people that see through it from the standpoint of knowing it's a house of cards what's presented. The media's, the official story, the magic bullet theory of Kennedy's day and the 9/11 of our day. So, okay, that's the easy part, to know that that's fake. But then why are they telling us what they're telling us? Where is all that going? And so, when Islamic State, when that was first announced with just that flag, that simple nobody, one person on a street with a flag. And you can go back to one of the shows, whenever that was, when that came out, we recorded it that week. And I said, that's, BS, that's propaganda. That's not a real uprising. That's not a movement. That's not people. That's television, And so knowing that and knowing the context, I said, well, this has got to be they need a terrible force in the world, right? Al-Qaeda is not cutting it anymore. We killed Osama bin Laden, they say. However, they wrote that act out, and it's time for the next act. It's been communism, down through my lifetime. And then terrorism. This is what they've used to keep everybody scared so that nobody will bother to realize that the people making all the decisions are, essentially stealing the money and not looking out for anybody as they were, their position requires and that they agreed to. But instead, this game just keeps going. We keep getting this circus, bread and circus, and the circus is just so all-consuming, isn't it? Everybody's on a phone now 24 hours a day, scrolling through their messages and hooked into the latest news. And yeah, but the latest news is just, if you haven't got a context that shows you that at this point in the game, the latest news is quite Orwellian, Big Brother sort of brainwashing. What else could it be? What's the other option? That it's all straight, right? The news is telling it straight. 9/11, 2 planes flew into the buildings and they fell, and then the other one fell, and the other plane hit the Pentagon and for some reason made a perfectly cylindrical hole through 3 steel reinforced concrete walls, but didn't leave any airplane parts. Another one crashed into the ground, didn't leave any airplane parts. Only time in aviation history, physics history, building history, architectural history, just all the firsts in history that happened that day, just like the magic bullet of Kennedy, right? First time anyone could take a pop shot from the top of a building or 6th floor of a building with that old rifle and, blow the guy's head off and wound the people next to him and hit the pavement and, right? All the different bullets and the different holes that were found that day. And yet they came out with the official story. 1 shooter. So, come on. This is the foundation we're always talking about. I always feel like I have to pull people out of the worldly, it's just such a sea of it. You're floating around in it. The air is made of all the propaganda. You breathe in it. You're eating it. There's just no way to escape it except in your own mind to have a deeper construct that it's almost like believing in God. You can't see God, but you believe God's there, and you imagine that God that you can't see is even more true than the stuff you can see. So it's a bit like that. You have this deeper reality that is beyond these headlines. And so they're more real. The deeper reality is more real than the headlines. And if you can't extract yourself from that, it'll always sound like what I'm saying is so far out because, look at New York Times and Washington Post. They're so respectable. All I say is, have they ever been right about anything? In the last 20 years with regard to all these things that we've been talking about on Dad's, show for basically 20 years now, from the time he was writing it into the archives at the very beginning to internet radio show for 8 years or something, 10 years, and then a website, and now on YouTube. Our story is verifiable, and so is the New York Times. So anyway, they've been, what were they saying about Islamic State? This is where I'm trying to go with all this, Dad. Trying to pull people away from this pretend reality that this is a real radical Islamic uprising. It is not. It is a mercenary army doing something other than what they're telling us it's doing. And that's kind of where for me, Dad, reading this week, it just seems like that's the obvious stuff. For me now, it's becoming more and more obvious, Dad, that, what are they bombing over there? They're talking this week with Russia having flown so many thousands of missions already. And the 250, I think, was the number of villages and towns that have been taken from the extremists through these bombings, right? 250 villages and towns. I mean, anybody getting the extreme, discrepancy or disparagement between the idea of these modern weapons, these hundreds of millions of dollars to fire these, uranium enriched, metal tipped, ordinances that essentially not only destroy life and property, but it's not good for the earth to be bombing all the earth with this stuff. Is this is the best way we can do it, huh? These villages and towns, bombing them with thousands of bombing missions from these high-tech weapons. Again, I don't know. I've never seen a picture of any of this stuff, and I'm still, Dad, looking for the journalism on, okay, so is anybody going to reckon up sort of how many bombs have been dropped on approximately how many installations, how many targets are there really? And how many have been bombed more than once? They can show us where everybody is, right? That Business Insider propaganda piece has always got exactly who's fighting who, where everybody is, nice colorful grids to let you know where the fighting's going on, who's got what. You mean you can't tell me for a year of America with the precision? I mean, they mention in these articles, Dad, the precision weaponry that Russia's using for these bombs that they're sending. And so, they're not just shooting at stuff running on the ground, right? These planes. They have some sort of target programmed in there, or they're honing in on something quite specific, is at least what this article made me, that's what I came away thinking from one of these articles, is that these guys aren't just over there blowing stuff up, carpet bombing. They've got very specific targets, and their bombs are, completely high tech, hitting very specific targets. And so I'm wondering, but I've never seen any kind of journalism reckoning up where would these thousands of bombs now, how many have dropped where, and what's been the result of that? How many bombs does it take to take back a village, right? Right? I mean, what are you bombing the people? I don't get it, is the thing, and nobody's showing it to me, Dad. That's how I know it's so fake. These modern aircraft with their high-tech equipment are bombing villages and towns. What's in the village? I'm wondering. What sort of strategic position? Okay, there's a bunch of ISIS people. Are they all just sitting in one building waiting to be bombed? Are they diffused throughout the various buildings in the village? Are we blowing up the village people's village in addition to the ISIS people? How many bombs? Is there ground troops? Are the village people taking up arms in resistance? I mean, what are these battles like? How big are these villages? Are they like the size of this little town where I am in Mexico? Are they, or are they like Puerto Vallarta with 100,000 people, or where you live, Dad? Where there's little towns, what we call towns, but they got 100,000 people. So if there were 5,000 of them diffused throughout the town, wouldn't be so easy to just get them, but they wouldn't just be in one location, would they? That you just bomb that one spot? And if you weren't bombing that spot, where would you bomb in your town, Dad, to get at these, say, 5,000 diffused rebels or ISIS soldiers that are in this village, and they're terrorizing people, or they've got control of the village, which means what? They're selling the milk over the counter? What are they doing in this village? Is it like the old West days? They're just holed up in somebody's house? So are they bombing somebody's house? Where are these bombs landing? They mention in one of these things, bombing their oil infrastructure, because that's where they get most of their money. Okay. We've been told they only have a couple of oil. I mean, how much oil infrastructure is there? We're talking thousands of bombs now. You'd think you could have pulverized their particular oil infrastructure by now. At least the roads going in and out. I mean, the same article that mentions that reaffirms what we've read before, Dad, that 30%, that they've lost approximately 30% of the territory they'd once gained at their fullest expansion, in the sense of swaths of territory, right? Well, didn't we read one of those articles that said that their income depends on constant expansion, right? Wasn't I mean, this is where I guess I'm getting to in a roundabout way today, Dad, trying to sort of bring the conversation up to date before reading the articles, is that, what I've been seeing since that time is they're pointing to the ultimate futility of ISIS. It's finite character. It doesn't have the money to go on forever. It doesn't have the fighters to go on forever. It doesn't have the momentum, as it were, of the people. And that's if I want to break off to get into an article today, the first one is it's from today, Sunday, the 24th of January, of AP by Hamza Hendawi. Or I should say it was published today, Sunday the 24th. The AP article is from January 18th, so it's several days back. And in fact, one of the reasons I grabbed this one, Dad, is because it showed up all week. For at least three of the days. You can tell some of the stuff they really want you to see, because over the week, as I'm looking at my daily stories, and there's 6 or 8 of them that come up on the headlines every day, some of them are the same for 2 or 3 days in a row, or 3 out of 4 days sometimes. And this is one of them. And so I thought, better check it out. And it's titled, from January 18th, Islamic State's Double Standards Sow Growing Dissolution. And, I just want to tie it in quickly to what we were already predicting from weeks ago, that this is no true Islamic movement. These are no real religious fanatics. This is not some deep-rooted spiritual force to be reckoned with. This is a paid-for mercenary army that's got an agenda that they're accomplishing. And I say if you tie that into all these bombings that are going on, it leads you to ask, what is going on? What is ISIS doing that all the bombings, let's say, are on their side, not against them, right? What's really going on in these swaths of Iraq and Syria where we're claiming to fight this phantom menace, ISIS? Because I say that if you dig through enough of the sort of evidence, the evidence of it, if you look at the case just from trying to stack up evidence of building that case, it's like one of those bad movies full of holes. It's just like, well, wait a minute now. It doesn't make sense. You haven't showed me even a picture of 1,000 ISIS soldiers. You haven't showed me a picture, even one single battle causing people to flee because of these horrible people. You've shown me a few very questionable pictures of ISIS cutting people's jihadi John, right? Strangely enough, coincidentally enough, the big mover and shaker, the big headline gatherer for ISIS a year ago is somebody from England, right? An English guy, Jihadi John. And what's he doing? Cutting people's heads off. And what's the unfortunate thing with that? It's not there in front of, in an obvious scene, in front of 1,000, 2,000, 5,000 bloodied fighters in the background, giving you the feeling of a Martin Scorsese picture, right? Holy mackerel, this is bloody, this is heavy, this is real. No, what does it give you? What many in the alternative media have already showed, appears to, their story is it's obvious fakery. It's, I'm not sure that anyone's ever had their head cut off yet, or a pilot's been actually burnt alive, or if that was all just like airplanes flying into buildings. They can do that. Remember 9/11? So they can show you people getting their heads cut off. They do it in the movies every day. And so, I'm just saying be open to it. I don't have to make a decision. I'm just stacking evidence up like Columbo when I was young. I'll accept everybody's story. Okay, that's what you say. Okay, that's what you say. Well, wait a minute, as I'm scratching my head like Columbo. There's just one thing that doesn't make any sense to me. You're aware airplanes can't fly inside of buildings like that, right? So if that didn't happen, the rest of your story sounds a little, has to be rethought. And so that's all I'm trying to say with all of this is this whole bombing of ISIS and this bull crud of ISIS being some religious, reality, when in fact it's been demonstrated to be a mercenary army. The people don't want anything to do with it. The few radical crazies they can get are like the radical crazies they can get to join anything. These skinheads or KKK, white pride, Aryan, all these different cults that imagine that they're, that have been sold an idea that's so narrow-minded that only complete, extreme adaptation to the ideal will give it any reality, right? So that's the same everywhere, but it's never really been such a big problem because most of the world is saner than that. You can get a few people to go shave their heads or put sheets over themselves and, carry burning torches and, you can get some people to drink the Kool-Aid kind of thing, but it's never proven to be something that the world has to worry about this grand group of people like they're trying to scare us. And certainly that's, it's not, there's no religious premise for it. It's not Islam any more than any of the Aryans or the Ku Klux Klan or Christianity. I mean, it's all just, Nazism isn't any more Christian than radical Islam is Islam. It's all a front. And that doesn't mean it doesn't have its own reality. It's been paid to be real, like Bolshevism. They paid those people to go kill those Christians and set up a state that officially didn't believe in God. That was a very real state, and is apparently a very real state. But it wasn't organic. What we were being shown wasn't real. It wasn't that all these people suddenly didn't believe in God. And so it's the same thing with the Jews who say they're Jews but are not. Not even the Jews in their own country will go along with it. The few that really have any orthodox attachment to Scripture, an attachment to the truth, they can see the discrepancy and don't mind stating it. Hey, wait a minute, these guys don't speak for Judaism. They speak for the state of Israel. They speak for Zionism. That's a different thing. So if the Jews inside the place are saying the same thing, so this crazy radical Islam, this is the world should just be sort of laughing at it, because if it wasn't being perpetrated by the people with all the money and the guns, it would be so easy to just put a stop to it. Like I've often pointed out, the parallel is like bank robbery. Bank robbery is a great idea. It's where the money is. Go steal the money from the banks. That's where it is. But the technology's caught up and you just can't do it. You just can't get away with it. It's just suicide. to try and steal their money anymore. Very few people get away with it. And so I say that it's the same idea with trying to hijack American airliner, passenger airliners and fly them into American airspace. That before 9/11, that had a 0 out of 700, every time a plane had gotten off track in almost 700 tries since the inception of the program. Every single time a jet's there within just a few minutes. I think 6 minutes or something is the outside. But on this particular day, 4 airlines are flying all over the place off track for 45 minutes. Possible, sure, but again, just keep piling up the evidence, and it just all starts to paint, a different sort of picture of manipulation, of wag the dog, of a power behind the scene. And then when you have the evidence that we brought out for, weeks now with the Carol Quigley, the political scientist and historian from the 60s, and, the predicted 3 world wars, at least the Third World War, came at the very latest in 1958, William Guy Carr's book. So you have all this evidence, to side against the official story and sort of sort through it all. So anyway, I've been saying from the beginning that this Islamic State wasn't real, and it was, so therefore it will have a beginning and an end according to the people who are using it to their purpose, just like communism did, and just like Al-Qaeda did. So Islamic State already has a sort of a purpose, and the script is being played out according to the, what I imagine is some general scheme that they know where they're going with it. They know who they're trying to kill. And right now it's a matter of how long does that take? What moves within that scheme do they need to make? And then how do they cover that in the press with the stories that they put out? And so I see that the stories like this that start to point out what bad guys these are, and how people from the inside now are escaping and pointing out that, these guys really haven't come through with their promise of justice and equality and good governance, Yeah, really. You mean the guys that have been chopping people's heads off, they just haven't come through, huh? Guys that are blowing up planes and have the whole world against them, Now we're deciding to, to spread the news they haven't come through. So anyway, this article is all about pointing out how this person from the inside, a lot of information refused to be identified. The people talking, they've made an enemy of almost everyone. So it just, there's a couple of articles this week, and overall, I just feel like it's screaming that the end is coming for ISIS. And my bigger question now, because I've seen that coming, Dad, I've been saying that they, and the way it's been playing out, they don't have the reality to continue the farce for long. The Bolshevik Revolution resulted in an entire country, which was then funded to be built up to be a war machine that could threaten, could be an antithesis to the thesis of the good Christian American, whatever, Catholic country. And of course, after World War II, all that European land was just given over there to Stalin to start killing people and turning it into atheist run, basically killing off all the spiritual and most of them Orthodox Christian countries, people, leaders, and installing, ones that were going along with this atheistic plan, this communism. That was all planted and done. But look what it resulted in. Power, weapons. a force in the world. What has ISIS been but a propaganda, wag the dog? What's it ever been? Show me a picture of more than 100 of these people in their little black uniforms and their pretty, their brand new flags. Show me a picture of a war that they're in. Show me a picture of people running for their lives from this. Instead, just these lovely articles every week with all their great graphics and this fighting going on. With we got drones now flying around every sporting event getting incredible pictures. We got, they're having to make laws at airports because of all the private photography, the drones now that people are using for photography flying around everywhere. But no CNN, no New York Times, no Washington Post, no Al Jazeera. Nobody's got any footage of any of this, these atrocious battles going on. And so I find that just, if I'm stacking the evidence, I find that impossible to swallow. And in place, I get all this other stuff. I get a single guy waving a flag. I always get a single blown up truck or burnt out vehicle. I get the same picture of the same band of Toyota trucks from 2 years ago now or whatever. One of the same group of 3 or 4 pictures from that moment when they were driving down the street with those. No update on the Toyota trucks. Just, so it's just too many evidences, Dad, that this is all not real. And so I'm just going to say that the thing is they can get rid of Islamic State in the sense now of constantly gaining on them. We're gaining on them. All the bombing's helping. We're moving them back. We're pushing them back. They're getting little towns and villages back. Because none of that has any, you don't have to show me any evidence. Just keep talking about it every day. But I still say that has to lead to acts of terrorism that then can be put down to this sort of, it's almost like a hot Cold War, right? You've got it's back to Al-Qaeda, these terrorist cells, and they're in deep cover. And so you really don't have anything the military can do. There's no war to go fight. There's no bombs to drop on anybody. They're in deep cover. They're in people's homes. They're living in cities and towns all over the world, which is what we're, when did that ever change? I thought that's what was going on with Al-Qaeda all along. And if these guys are affiliated with Al-Qaeda, what's the migrant? Why is the migrant thing? Finally the finance minister or somebody from Finland I saw in an interview this week, and he was obviously sent there to make some sense, to make it look like they're talking some sense, but it's all wag the dog crap. Anyway, what's going on right now with the immigrant thing, Dad, I promise you, but he was at least pointing out that, migration and terrorism have to be, you can't just automatically connect the two. Terrorist cells are terrorist cells. They're already in place. They already live in your country. They're not migrating to your country. You're not going to stomp out terrorism by putting fences up. You're just going to stop freedom. And so, that's the argument there. On the other side, of course, is the pressure that it puts on these economies to have this sudden influx. Not only the economies, but the pressure on justice systems and all sorts of things, because you have potential for things outside of your normal control mechanisms. Right? You've got a lot of people running around now that don't have your IDs, that aren't subject to your laws in the same way that your citizens are. And so until you've put all those people through some sort of process, you have the strain of that on your system. And so, that's a reality that but the terrorism thing is, is been the big scare to attach to it, and very few people talking the sense when you've got people like Donald Trump, these high profile people like the president of Hungary and the president of Poland now, I guess, also, and a couple of those other countries in Eastern Europe, talking that same sort of trash about protecting Europe and fencing off the borders and all this kind of thing because of terrorism, where that doesn't make any sense. All that makes sense is being patient and keeping your own foundational liberties intact as a first priority, and then adjusting to this crisis, because that's what it is. All of a sudden you got 1 million people a year, tens of thousands for some of these countries, hundreds of thousands a year, applying for visas or just coming through your borders at different areas. I mean, this is a bit of a crisis of sorts that has to be dealt with. But man, it's not I don't see it as the end of Europe, the end of civilization as we know it. All that has to be painted into it. It's from people not giving it any proper perspective. Most of these people are running either for financial reasons, because they can't get work back home because there's war or civil war going on, or they're running from the war. Terrorists don't need to enter that way. If that provides another option, okay, well then that's something the rest of the world's going to have to protect itself against. But because it can't protect against all terrorism, you can't shut your gates to everybody coming in like an idiot like Trump, the kind of mouthpiece that guy's, showing himself to be. This hard line, shut the borders. Yeah, because that'll stop it. Because you can't get a French person. I mean, the Jihadi John was English, right? So come on, what kind of stupidity is all that? That's that's the best we can do. That's our presidential candidates. That's our journalism. That's the level of the discussion, the narrative. Okay. So anyway, so this first one, Islamic State's double standards, so growing dissolution. It's a good article. There's more. I don't know that everybody just wants me to read these things. It seems like it's better to give my opinion and you read it for yourself. But anyway, it just points out that these guys are, just like we've been saying, they have to be shown to be the bad guys, and nobody's really with them. And now what do we do with them? But now they're all, they've been recruiting. They've got these cells. They're in, they're in with through the refugees, all the new ones. And in other words, now the problem has, the bad apple is in there, spoiling the bunch. And there's nothing you can do about it, is what I think we're going from here, Dad. I don't think the whole Islam, what I think it shows signs of is we're getting close to the solution in Syria and Iraq, which is good news. From the eschatological viewpoint, it means this next stage of development where we're anticipating that the Hashemite king will somehow be taking over that land, whether it's directly now or comes through the next step. But anyway, the Islamic State's on its way out already as someone in charge of that area. But that brings us now to the more interesting stuff that I think is laying the groundwork for, World War III. Because remember, that's where we're going with this, if we're reading it correctly, if we're on the right track with William Guy Harvey and Carol Quigley and the prophecy of Daniel and the book of Revelation and such, that Armageddon and World War III and Islamic eschatology with the Malhama. If all that's what's in the future, well, then some of these other articles show how that's coming about as well. So here's one from the 20th of January from AP by Vladimir Isachenkov. and it is titled Russia Shows Military Might in Syria Ahead of Peace Talks. And this is the one I think that was pointing out the sort of weaponry that they have. I'll read just a little piece here. Since Russia launched its bombing campaign in Syria on September 30th, its warplanes have flown over 5,700 missions. The number is remarkable for a force comprising just a few dozen warplanes. So whatever Russia's, if that's accurate, if that's not just let's blow some, somebody pick a number out of a hat, we're just writing fiction anyway. But if this is what's really going on over there, and they're reporting it to have, to cover the fact that these planes, you can't deny the flight of the planes and such. 5,700 missions. What are these guys doing? Who are they bombing? Right. So to go on a little bit, the Russian military brought a group of Moscow-based reporters to the base Wednesday to see the operation. Defense Ministry spokesman said by the afternoon Russian warplanes had flown about 40 sorties, with each aircraft typically hitting 3 to 5 targets on a single run. In the early stages of the bombing campaign, planes struck only one target during each mission. So now they're going out and they're hitting 3 to 5 targets. And by the afternoon, these guys had already flown 40, so do your math, approximately 100 to 200. Right, or at least 100 to 200, 120 to 200 targets, right, in one day. Let's see. I didn't want to have to read all this, Deb, but some of the other parts of it I thought were important. This article had some stuff. The Russian military has insisted it is targeting the Islamic State group and other extremists, and has angrily dismissed Western accusations that it is hitting moderate rebels fighting President Assad. Moscow also has rejected claims that its aircraft have hit civilians, insisting that all casualties have been at extremist facilities away from populated areas. So extremist facilities, okay, again, so what they just show us, these guys are flying 100 to 200 a day now. 5,700 bombing missions. Hitting only extremist facilities. How many, what facilities? Okay, now this defense minister said Syrian government forces backed by Russian airstrikes have retaken about 250 villages and towns from the extremists. He said each bombing target is verified through multiple intelligence sources, and every fifth target Russia hits is now chosen thanks to information from, quote, patriotic opposition forces. So somebody on the ground is telling them where these, and I tell you in this article also points out that these guys, they got bunker buster bombs capable of piercing 23 feet of rock. They got a sophisticated targeting system allowing them to use even regular bombs with pinpoint accuracy. So, and now they've pointed out one I think that's very important, is they've got now in there the most remarkable new weapon added at the Himayim base since October is presence of the S-400 air defense systems. Russia deployed the powerful weapons capable of hitting targets 240 miles, 400 kilometers away after Turkey shot down a Russian warplane along the Syrian border. So it shows you why that whole wag the dog story, shoot down the plane, now Russia's got to beef up. I mean, I'm trying to tie it in, Dad, to our deeper context, that what I've been seeing and saying for a long time is you got to see the build up of weaponry. What we're watching for is a Malhama, an Armageddon, a World War III kind of, deaths of tens of millions of people probably. How's that going to happen? We need some some bombers and stuff, aren't you? And so here they are, all this buildup, all this buildup, all this buildup over there, and claiming that they've taken back 250 villages. Again, I mean, you can almost shoot that many targets in a day. How many targets are in a village? What are these extremists doing in a village? What are their strongholds? That they're not killing civilians, they're just hitting extremist targets. What have they got? Some little ammo depot in a village? How many bombing runs, right? How many targets verified on the ground through your guys that are, they're marching through these villages, giving them the GPS coordinates. I mean, how else? But not one picture, any of that, really, all file photos of planes and ships and, a couple videos of grainy footage of a bomb blowing something up, being told, oh yeah, that's this. That's this building. That's this oil refinery. That's this convoy. A year. Thousands, we read not long ago, Dad. We've flown over 8,000 bombing missions at that time. We must be getting close to 10,000. They're at almost half of that, more than half of that already. And we've seen 3 or 4 grainy photos of something blowing up. So anyway, but Russia shows military might in Syria ahead of peace talks, of course, because peace is coming. So what do we need? Military might. More planes, more bombs, more guns, more high-tech stuff getting into Syria since we're all making peace. Okay, so let's see. Next article I grabbed. These are in no particular order, Dad. I'm just trying to get through as much as I can. This one was out of Reuters from the 20th of January by Luke Baker. Title says, Faced with EU and U.S. criticism, Israeli insults fly. So this one's very interesting because, the whole thorn in the side, right? What does the whole World War III thing say, Dad? The William Guy Carr is quoting, supposedly, from Albert Pike, that they would agents of the Illuminati would foment the hostilities between Israel and Islam, right? And so this I see as let's see. I'm just trying to see how long or how much of this I have to go into. This is just it keeps stirring the pot, and it shows the sort of division with Israel that some of the EU members are the vibe that they're putting out, that's not all backing everything Israel wants to do. Although I see all this, Dad, still it's all just saber rattling, because I mean, is anyone not going to protect Israel if someone were to go, if Iran launched a war against Israel, would the West not protect it? If anyone launched a war against Israel, who else is there? Really, to launch a war against Israel? Is Syria coming after them? Right, especially nowadays. Is any of that real? And so the whole thing is to keep this Palestinian thorn always fresh. That's what blows me away. That I keep trying to look for just the right thing to read out of this, Dad. They're being accused of having two standards, of course, which they do with Palestinians, that they're subject to Israeli military law, while Israeli settlers are subject to civil law. And so, but they got jumped down the throat of the U.S. Embassy. The the embassy, the ambassador, the embassy representative that made a comment about this double standard that Israel has with Palestinians, and that really shot it down. And that Israel's mad because the European Union is wanting to put labels on things that come from over there, come from the settlements, to differentiate them from Israel and the land that Palestinians are seeking, right? The settlement land that Israel wants to keep expanding onto, even though that's the whole point of contention. So all this peace talks, and we used to see that as so hard to explain, but now to me it's quite easy. It's just like the communism thing. It's you have this Cold War kind of almost a hot Cold War, but you have this constant tension that you can always use to bring the fire up, right? It's like keeping the pilot light lit over there. And so, yeah, they keep pushing no matter what. They keep building no matter what. They keep up a strong arm. They keep up that over powerful posturing no matter what. There's always some incident that's in the paper. There's always some hostility that it just, and perhaps that's become natural. Perhaps that there's so much, they've created so many surface areas for that friction that they don't have to create it in the sense of a false flag. There's always friction there. There's always some Palestinian so grieved at their oppression that they're ready to go throw themselves in harm's way. And so there's always some Israeli so brainwashed into being, into this civil war or this cultural war, that they're ready to protect their people by killing these Palestinians that are reacting to the oppression. That seems to be the most reasonable explanation in my view. It's a very touchy view, and I think it's kept touchy by the media on purpose. And Israel being funded by the West, what I'm pointing out, Dad, is we're the instigator on purpose to keep the thorn over there, to keep the fire hot, so that can be the pressure point that's used and has been used for all these years to, as it said, agents of the Illuminati foment the Israeli Islamic thing. Now that starts to make sense to me, this PLO, this bombing, this suicide bombing, all this BS that's been going on for all these years that didn't go on for 1,000 years between these two cultures, right? But it all foments this aggression between the two that leads to a war. Okay, so anyway, that was out of Reuters, that the EU and Israel are a bit at each other's throats, so it's not all chummy, which also sets up this end game when someone does come at Israel. Who's going to ever side with them? That's the big dark part of the puzzle still that I'm trying to sort the pieces into, Dad. As you know, we often talk about, how is it possible that in that time when that king of the north turns on Israel and takes it, Jerusalem does fall to this Islamic king, and the Jews are slaughtered except for the ones that have fled out of there. When that happens, what position is America in, and Britain and Europe at that moment? Where is America and Europe and Britain? And is there is the money in that sense, turning on Israel finally, having achieved its goal that we talked about here in this Third World War, fomenting using Israel, because it says annihilate the both of them, this prediction by Pike, so that both Islam and Israel are annihilated. So it's not like the outcome that Sheikh Imran Hussein sees, where the goal of the money people is to set is that the Israel will be the center of the world, because that satisfies the prophecy of the false Messiah, and they're going to rule the world through the false Messiah from Israel. I mean, that makes sense as the goal, but it doesn't get there. But it doesn't make sense for killing Israel if you're going to do that, right? So the prophecy clearly says that Jerusalem's taken. Now, why would they fund the false Messiah to take it from Israel to set up Israel? So it seems like that's where the double cross occurs along the narrative of the three predicted world wars, and using Islam and Israel to mutually destroy one another. They're using the weaponry of Israel and its allies, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, America, Britain, to start this war to destroy, I think, Iran. I think that's where that's headed. And afterward, this leader of the Sunnis, this caliph that now has the spirit of the dragon, is released and has come in him, and he thinks he's God and he can run the world, and he's going to go take Jerusalem too, if just to throw some loose interpretation on all that prophecy. And he goes and now takes, turns on Israel with the same backing, because they're looking to get rid of Israel too, whoever it is that's written these three world war prophecies. And then to fit into the bigger scheme now, he's destroyed after destroying Israel to completely finish the annihilation. So the Sunni king is raised up to have an army to go essentially destroy as many of the Arabs as you can, being the Shia Arabs. Now, after that victory, essentially being with the support of Israel, now Israel's turned on, and the Arabs come after Jerusalem and take Jerusalem, and now the support turns on them, and the guns from Turkey, probably, perhaps Russia, come and turn on the false Messiah king, the king of the north out of Daniel's prophecy, the one through the narrative of the Albert Pike prediction that would have been used to take out Israel, now has to be taken out also. And this brings then on the final conflagration. So I don't know, I'm just throwing that out there as a loose way of all the pieces of the puzzle, trying to fit them into the dark space, which is how it is at some point that Israel winds up being turned on, or just being taken, when in the world we still live in, I just don't see, none of it makes sense. They're still out there provoking and getting mad when anyone points it out. Literally flying off the handle at the European Union just for pointing out the obvious double standard. So, right, it doesn't seem yet like Israel's under any threat from anyone. Iran doesn't even have a gun, and if they did, it's clear the world wouldn't let them point it at Israel. Right? Putin's already been there shaking Israel's hand. Isn't that so interesting? All of the liaisons in the world of in this modern, let's use the word they seem to choose for today's world, the quagmire going on over there. Russia's not friends with Turkey, but friends with Israel, who's friends with Turkey, but not Syria, but Russia's friends with Syria, but I mean, it's just like, wow. And one of these articles, if I get to it today now, I don't know if I'll have time, Dad, but one of these articles, I'll jump on it real quick, that I'm talking about this quagmire from Vox World. This was from the 22nd, updated by Max Fisher on January 22nd. And the title of this one is, Vladimir Putin is not in charge of Syria, never has been, never will be. And I don't want to have to read it. There's a lot of good stuff. I give you the title of these articles so that you guys can, check them out for yourself. But the gist of this one is that, it's not like Putin, because he's in there saving Assad's butt, he still can't tell Assad what to do. Hey, Assad, step down. Assad said no. And Putin, what they're pointing out is Putin's still obligated to go in there and protect the different installations that are essentially through his Alawite connections, right? These are his allies. They're the Alawites. And so he's there protecting the Alawite establishment, Shia essentially, which is what I'm saying. This is where all this war's going on. Because ISIS, of course, is the mercenary army that's trying to push back at all these sort of installations, and Russia's protecting their locations. And meanwhile, they're protecting Assad simply because Assad is the Alawite leader. But what this article is saying is Putin's already told Assad, maybe you should do this or that, and Assad has refused. So that what they're saying is, Assad's fighting for his own breath, Putin's fighting for Russia's strongholds in Syria, and there's times when they're not working together necessarily. Putin could very well be happy with a different regime in there that was pro-Russia. He's just worried about protecting Russia's interests, not necessarily who's in charge, unless who's in charge winds up being someone with that doesn't have Russia's interest at heart, with this, which this article is saying, Assad is a sort of a half-hearted. He's got Russia's interest at heart in the sense of agreements with Russia, but not in the sense of dancing to Russia's tune. So anyway, all of that I still believe is all propaganda, because each of these players, is all on same banking system. Syria, Russia. It's the same people Carol Quigley, Dad, would point out to us have been infiltrated for 50 years now. So, you decide for yourself. For my money, that nothing else explains the world except to see it that way. These guys all having their strings pulled. And it's not that they don't have to do it in the world that's been set up for them. In the context of the world, Syria is Russia's last, major ally in that world outside of Russia. They have to protect that territory. It's not like they're doing it just to get to Armageddon. Armageddon is the prophesied result of, just like Albert Pike said, that they'll get to a third world war. Not everybody, every general, I'm sure, is attempting to get to a third world war. They're attempting the particular objective in front of them, which would be save this portion of Syria for Russia, right? Or save this portion of Ukraine for Russia. Or all these different battles that are going on in the world are quite real. When I say wag the dog world, I don't mean it's all Hollywood. I mean the explanations are Hollywood, and much of what can be faked, planes flying into buildings, people's heads being chopped off, a mercenary army that's supposed to be out conquering somebody. Those can be faked, and they have been faked. Okay, so a couple more articles, Dad, from Reuters on Sunday. It said U.S. says prepared for military solution against Islamic State in Syria. So basically, yeah, they're saying that they're ready to kick it up a notch. We don't know if it would be better if we can reach a political. We do know it would be better if we can reach a political solution, but we are prepared, if that's not possible, to have a military solution in this operation and taking out Daesh. Joe Biden was telling them. So Biden's out there saying, giving them the, hey, if we got to do it now, boots on the ground's what that's really talking about. And so anyway, I say this is all pointing toward, the end of ISIS in their role. We're going to move on to Act 3, the first play of the third act kind of thing, right? Once Islamic State, in this sense, moves on, or whatever. Anyway, it's all in a transition, and Islamic State is not going to grow and take over the territory. If anything, they're going to diffuse and become one of those, all these cells diffused all over the world so we can all be scared to death of them forever without ever being able to battle them. They'll be our next, communists hiding in every corner. And that way that battle can always go on, and they can use any false flag event anywhere, anytime to basically scare the crud out of people and pass any laws they want, all that kind of stuff. It's setting up perfectly for all that, but it won't be with this big ISIS organization. They're already talking about 30% less territory. Now Russia's bombed them 250 towns and villages back. Their infrastructure's been taken out. Their oil infrastructure's been hurt. They're not making as much money, right? I mean, what's that say? They're not growing? No, they're shrinking. And then the other thing, Dad, to jump back, because I see this article's here. This was from CNBC from January 21st. Europe on the verge of collapse, according to George Soros. And, I think a lot of this is real wag the dog stuff. It's what they want you to. But remember, in the Albert Pike version, Dad, of the Three World Wars, you've got this prediction of it straining everyone to the economic as well as spiritual and social brink of exhaustion, right? That hasn't really happened yet. I mean, you could say places like Greece, it maybe has happened, but come on, for the most part, the world has weathered the economic storm. I mean, it just meant a lot of funneling the riches up into the banks, and the people sort of getting less, moving home with their parents, giving up their homes, giving up the car, right? Buying less stuff, getting less vacations, right? All less less toys for the kids, all that kind of stuff. Less computers for the schools. That's all it really meant in that bigger picture. A reduction of stuff for the population, and all that money just went right up into this hierarchy, which I think is all done to plan, Dad, because it's all the funding or the last sucking up of resources before a big change. This Act 3 that's coming up, perhaps, if I could stick with that analogy. We've been watching Act 2 now for some time, maybe since 9/11 was the opening of Act 2, and we've been on this Act 2, terrorism grips the world, the rise of terrorism as the new boogeyman, and the march toward World War III. Now, Act 3 has to get us from here to this next World War. And so the refugee crisis seems to be back on the front page. Europe on the verge of collapse is one of these articles by George Soros that just can't take it. Just can't take it. I mean, nobody really has any explanations for why, or any kind of reasonable journalistic insight into, you know, breaking down this general refugee crisis into something that is understandable. How many of these people are running from war? How many of these people want a job? How many of these people want to return home? You know, how many of these people are destitute? How many come with money? You know, just start breaking the demographic down so we can get a real handle on, you know, what's the real problem, people? We have this many people that have nothing, need work, are destitute, don't have anywhere to go, right? I mean, how come that's not sort of coming out as, okay, here's what the world has to do. We've got a few million people out of the billions in the world. Certainly we can integrate this over time. It may not be easy the first year, the second year, the third year, but come on, you telling me in a 5 or 10 year plan, if I'm just having to throw myself in the responsibility of to be a decision maker, or someone that has, you know, whose job it is to think about solutions for my fellow constituents or country members, or, you know, countrymen and women. If I have to think about it, I'm going to think, well, shoot, I'm not going to let it ruin my country, whether I'm Germany or Sweden or America or Greece or whoever. I'm going to think, okay, what are the possible solutions? You know, let's really get it out on the table. Let's come up with the plan. You know, we can adjust as we see how well our plan is working, but just to keep freaking at this idea that everybody's just, oh, Europe's on the verge of collapse. Why would you even say that? Why would you even allow it? See, and the point that they're making, the collapse they're really talking about, one is they're scaring them with the economic, which again, Dad, I'm using this to point back to this idea that the Third World War prediction is that they will bring everyone to this financial exhaustion point. But the other thing is it's the collapse of the freedom for citizens to move throughout Europe, which is what Europe was based on. Instead of all these gates every couple of 100 kilometers when you cross from one country to another, and now you got these gates with these armed guards, and you got to have papers, you got to have visas, and you can come in and you can't come in, and right? That was the as big of point of the European Union as just the financial union. That now like states in the United States of America, everybody crosses right over from state to state through just a simple checkpoint. And so that's the other way in which they're using this term. And so what that says to me is, they're scaring everyone with the idea that that these border closings, they keep talking about the fences, putting up more fencing, and nobody talks about, hey, we got peace talks going on. We're talking about ending the civil war in Syria. We can probably send a lot of these people back. We can raise some of the money we're worried about spending on the immigration crisis to help repatriate these people so that it's not as big a crisis. Spend the money on sending them back instead of spending the money on keeping them here. And so, but I don't see any of that journalism pointing out that we're coming to the end of the crisis theoretically because they're talking peace in Syria. They're already committed now to sitting down and finding a peaceful solution and a transitional government and getting on with the elections and doing all that without having to fight for it to finish it with a civil war. So that's already what's going on in Syria. So theoretically, the powers that be, with all their influence, with the pressure to keep pushing toward a peaceful solution and less weapons, less destruction, less civil war, could start to at least think, hey, in the next year or two, there shouldn't be more people leaving Syria. There should actually be some people returning to Syria. But they keep talking about this like it's an opening in the bottom of the sea, and the whole sea has to drain through it before it will ever stop. Everybody's got to come to Europe before this will stop now. they don't talk about it like it's a limited thing that does have a finite term and even a potential solution in the more, reasonable short-term aspect. It's a crisis at the moment, but it's not a ruin Europe crisis. I mean, that sounds stupid to me to keep talking about it that way with all the, the history of Europe, the miles that it's taken to get here. It sounds like it would be much simpler to talk about what is it going to take for Europe to get over this? How long, instead of Europe on the verge of collapse, how long is it going to take Europe to put things back in order, if that's the case? So anyway, Dad, but Europe on the verge of collapse. Another article from the 22nd, French Prime Minister says refugee crisis threatening idea of European Union. And that's primarily the article that brings out the movement of people and how the freedom of movement now is already being restricted, and it's, the future is so dim, looking at this idea that they'll have to keep putting more fences and more controls, and it's ruining the very idea, threatening the idea of the union itself. And then the last article, again, just to show you, this is all the preponderance of these articles this week. End of Europe? Question mark. Berlin, Brussels shock tactic on migrants. So they're trying to say that they might shut the gate. Berlin and Brussels is hoping that maybe this warning will slow people down or have, give them a different perspective on it, that it's not just a free-for-all, but that they're actually having to think about shutting the gate, even though, they don't want to. But for their political survival, they might have to take some greater steps. So anyway, it's back on the front burner, Dad. And I say that that's, for a good reason. They didn't put it on the burner months ago for nothing. They didn't take it off the burner during Christmas for nothing. And it's not back on the burner right now, just like that first story that I went into with the Islamic State's double standard, sowing, growing, dissolution. That was like 3 times this week, at least, on my headline, my list of headline stuff. So they, it's something they want you to see that. They want you to know that ISIS is, they're on their way out. They're not so popular anymore. But the refugee crisis is threatening all of Europe. And I didn't read any talk in those 3 articles, Dad, about the fact that with peace talks and all going on, what bearing that might have on the refugee crisis. That the millions aren't just going to keep coming forever. If 1 million is what's had to be absorbed, and you're used to absorbing 300,000 or 400,000 a year, right? How long does it really take to sort of wean that, into your, what I mean? Displace that now into your normal figures. As I say, I'm not trying to deny that for many people who deal with those issues, it's at a crisis level at the moment, and that it probably comes with a lot of the issues that are in the news that are crisis issues. But I think a lot of that is invented, the hype of it, and none of the other side is explored about the temporary nature of the issue and some of the possible solutions, and the fact that Europe has come too far to let a temporary civil war in Syria destroy all of Europe, even if it means certain constrictions in Europe being temporarily put into place for 2 or 3 years, 5 years, whatever it takes to get back a certain level of security, since that's what we're talking about. But anyway, Dad, so from our perspective, I say that we're getting closer to the rise of the good Sunni king that's going to go forth conquering, because Islamic State's no longer being talked about how they're. Remember just what, 2-3 months ago, boy, they were getting bit. There was nothing anybody could do. They were having their will. Remember when we read about Saudi Arabia, Dad? What's going to, all we can do is sit back and watch and see what happens with the unraveling of Saudi Arabia, right? How many times have we been in that position over this last 6 months or so where all we can do is sit back and watch because these guys are so popular, so well funded, so well armed. They are just on the move and nothing we can do. We're just playing catch up, right? I mean, go back and listen. I'm just trying to recall the things that we've talked about. I'm just, following this narrative like a bad, B romantic novel sort of thing, right? You just change the scenery and you change the motives and you change the history as you need it to keep selling the current frame, the current scene. And so now we're on to, but still Russia's power. A lot about Russia this week. Islamic State, not such good boys. And the U.S., everybody's sort of tightening the screws. Russia's getting more done over there. We're committing to a bigger force now, even boots on the ground, whatever we got to do to push back now on these guys. And meanwhile, while all that's going on, they're losing ground, and peace talks with Assad, or with Israel, in Syria, about the removal of the Assad regime. Good alliances this week, it said, between America and Saudi Arabia. No big problem there, even after what happened with Iran, because of course, we're funding all that bombing of Shias through Saudi Arabia in Yemen, in that proxy war against Iran. So no problem there. And yet, in other words, the West seems to have the upper hand, seems to be gaining the upper hand. The civil war isn't getting worse, it's getting better, right? It's not, more people aren't dying. Now they're fighting over who's going to sit at the table and talk about the transitional government and such. And then on the other side of it, the ISIS scourge seems to be finally have already reached its zenith and is retracting. So why is the migrant problem not being talked about as something to look forward to reducing now? Oh, okay. How come we're not all breathing easier that, well, that should certainly, slow down the flow of migrants, right? But instead, anyway, I'm spending too much time on that, Dad. Sorry, but I'm just saying that I think there must be a reason that 3 of my articles that I picked out this week all have to do with, Europe on the brink again, end of Europe, Europe on the verge of collapse, and refugee crisis threatening the idea of the EU. So I think it's on purpose that all that's in front of us. I'm always afraid that what it means is, false flag events, because I'm so sorry for the people that have to be caught up in that kind of, that part of the history that we're living. But I fear that those sort of things have to keep happening to push this narrative along. And I'm just glad that they're happening at a lesser pace than I anticipated, and even with less loss of life, it would seem, because most of it, all they got to do is threaten a school or shooting spree, kill a couple of people, and in America anyway, or in Europe, and everybody's scared to death. So But anyway, Dad, I don't think we've seen the end of that. Is the problem? I think that we're seeing the end of ISIS as the big threat to take over Syria, which will now start to create the vacuum that the Hashemite king will either take on in the near term or or there'll be another step. But I think it's going to create a vacuum now pretty soon over there. So anyway, thanks for having me on, and I'll talk to you next week, huh, Pop?
Well, Tony, I think you're exactly right, and it was another superb analysis of this week's happenings in the news in the Middle East. And folks, I hope you enjoyed the show today. And give us a little feedback. Go to BroSal.org on YouTube or the Philadelphian Church on YouTube, and comment. Drop us a line. Subscribe. And if you like what you're hearing and you want this to continue, drop us a frankincense offering. There's a button right up on the right-hand corner of the title to keep this ministry and the word coming to you. And for Tony, I'm Brother Sal. Till next week, we want you to have a great day in Christ. Thank you.